It's time for another episode of the CVC Home Service Success Network. And today it'll be myself, it'll be Cheryl, and it'll be our good buddy from up in Rochester, New York, Randy Sperling with us again. Randy's become a regular feature here on the store because he has such great input into what we do. So if you're listening to us live, hey, I want to welcome you aboard today. And if you're listening on the replay, we really appreciate it. And if you like our content, give us a like, give us a heart. It helps us in our reach out. We're reaching out to thousands of people every week with this messages that we're getting out. So hopefully today will be no different because we're going to talk about something today that may just eradicate that chaos that you feel as a business owner. Because today we're going to talk about something, and it involves, you may call them standard operating procedures. Hey, you may call them standard operating guidelines, or as my buddy Al Levy calls them, they may be manuals. But what we're talking about is the guidelines, the processes of spelling out how your people are supposed to get their job done, how they're supposed to excel with your customers, how they are supposed to meet the criteria and meet the expectations and provide the customer promise and fulfill it to every single customer. And as I've said many times, standard operating procedures, every time there is waste, every time there is a mistake, it can be traced right down to three things. Number one, there is no SOP. Number two, the SOP is wrong. Or number three, someone simply didn't follow the SOP. So here's the thing, writing and putting together this library of SOPs is a very time consuming task. But what I've seen is I've seen people that have actually done the work, but it's failing. And I've finally determined that there's a reason it's failing. And that's what we're going to talk about today is the rollout of SOPs to your people, the rollout of your SOGs, your standard operating guidelines, the rollout of your manuals, no matter what you want to call them, they have to be properly rolled out. And if they're not properly rolled out with your people, guess what? They are going to fail. It's going to happen. So, Randy, when I talk about SOPs, SOGs, manuals, this type of thing, what's your thought on this as an important part of management of your company and your people?
First thing that pops in my head is 1994 when I was in boot camp. The word SOP, the letters, the abbreviations, I was like, what? What are we talking about? And then I learned from that experience in the Army, you have to have SOPs. You have to have them. And it sounds kind of like harsh, but like we don't really have them in our household, but there's expectations that the kids have, and those are rules or chores. That's no different than in your business. So my first thought with the SOPs is you just have to have the information there. But again, we have to be flexible and add to it or take away from it as you mature your business.
Yeah, you better believe it because this is what I tell clients. The building of this library of SOPs is a never ending project. It will go on forever because new things are going to come up. New mistakes are going to happen. New processes are going to come out. I mean, who could have imagined 20 years ago we would need a policy on our Facebook use in our companies where social media? I can remember at one time when I worked in a factory, we weren't allowed to use phones. And today it's a God-given right that everybody carries a mobile phone and they're on it. And significant time is wasted every single workday because people are calling their significant others, their girlfriends, their boyfriends, their kids, whatever. So Cheryl, what about you? What's your thoughts on SOPs?
Well, you born and bred that in me for so many years that I think I got a lot of it by osmosis, but you have to have them. And most people that I ask when I'm interviewing, I'll ask about SOPs or standard, most people don't know the letters, but they always think that they're important. It's important to the people that are there too, because it gives them a guideline. It gives them something they can actually see and read and understand. And it takes out the having to actually look at them every time you turn around and say, I told you, this is because I told you so. If it's in the SOP, they've read it.
Yeah. And one of the ways I illustrate this, Randy, and I'll say that you're my new client. I'm coming in and I'm doing an initial analysis with your business. And I'm noticing that you don't have an SOP library. And I'm asking you the question, Randy, how much information is in your head that your people need every single day that they're calling and asking you questions on an ongoing basis? That's how
Too
we
much. Too much. And not only that, not only is there too much information in our heads, there's not enough time or space. So then we store it a little too far back. And by the time you recall it, you've lost money as an owner because you can't even recall that information fast enough. I don't, you know what I mean? Once you get moving and grooving, there's way too much information in there. Also, like I said, from the Army, I saw SOPs, but later on, and I go back to my real estate investing side of our business, I heard something on a podcast years ago that I thought was just genius, which was tracking everything you do and then making forms for it so that you can offload that work, which is just like an SOP. So like they have systems that allow you to mimic your screen so you can go through all of the steps of how to order something or reorder. And then you just put it over in a file and you say, hey, when you got to order supplies, this is how.
Yeah.
It saves the person who needs the help from calling you because you've made that library.
Correct. And here's another ingredient for you to think about. How concerned are you about your business survival? Let me ask you, if everybody in your company walked out one day, and you've got to duplicate that workforce very rapidly. Cheryl, are SOPs important when that happens?
I lost everybody but one guy when we transferred the business over. And so had we not had SOPs, it would have ended the business at that point. And they were there. We were back up and running full force within 2 days.
Yeah.
Wow, good for you.
48 hours. Now, we were at a time, Randy, when there was an excess number of employees. This was back in the recession of the 07 to 010 period when everything, and what we're talking about here, this is the real life story. This is when Cheryl bought her manufacturing plant from me. Okay. So you guys understand, even though Cheryl and I are married, we have a premarital agreement. We are individuals under law. So I sold the manufacturing business to Cheryl, lock, stock, and barrel. It's all hers. And you can even ask her. I don't interfere. I don't even know what she made last year. I don't even know what she grossed. Okay. That's her business. It's not mine. So anyway, by having this library, we were able to bring people in and we were shipping product in 48 hours. That's right, 48 hours. And
That's
without
amazing.
these SOPs, Cheryl, what would it have been like?
It could have taken months. I mean, I didn't have to have an excess training period. I showed him the manuals. The one guy that was with me was not expertise on each section, but he knew enough to kind of help them tweak it through. And it didn't take them long. I mean, it's some of the framing's technical. The hardy board is less technical. That was the easiest part to fill. But getting the framers back up and running. And yes, did I have people coming back after they realized I was not going to raise the money I gave to them? But we never hired anyone that walked away back.
Right. And I want to bring
you can't do that.
I want to bring someone on that just made a comment. And I know this person, it's Barbara, and she works at Chesapeake Chimney, and she is in the office. Very extremely capable CSR dispatcher person. Okay. She does a fantastic job, but she just made a tremendous reason why to have it because she doesn't go in the field to do the service work, but by having these SOPs, she's able to gain an understanding of what those guys do in the field that assist her on answering those customer questions where the technician in the field is not getting a phone call about simple things. This is another benefit of having this library of SOPs. So anyway, to give you a little background more than this, I bought in the SOPs back in the 1990s. I read a book called The E-Myth, written by Michael Gerber. Then I actually had breakfast with Michael Gerber one day, got to meet him, and bought into the process of building SOPs in the business from reading the E-Myth. If you're in business, you've never read the E-Myth, it's recommended reading. It's one of those books you need to have. But so we wrote SOPs and we're seeing other people do it. But again, you can write the most excellent processes and document them, but if you don't properly roll them out, introduce them to your people and get them bought in, I'll guarantee something, your SOPs are going to fail. Randy, when I say that, what thought comes to your mind?
First thing I want to do is any of the listeners who are listening without these SOPs, before we fast track them into how to roll it out, let's remind them it doesn't have to be the perfect book. It can just be a starting point, and it can be done through nowadays. Well, we're talking about 20 years ago and what we talked about now. Nowadays, it's AI or a $9 subscription somewhere, and you can download an SOP that's similar to your business to kind of build from a good framework. So just before we tell everybody how easy it is to roll it out or not, it's not that overwhelming to put these books together. It's, again, just maybe time blocking, 15 minutes a week for yourself as an owner. What can I do to save this? And then having that awareness, like, hey, if somebody's asked me the same thing twice, it's time to write that into the SOP. Yes. So when it comes to the rollout, I think the biggest thing that you and I were talking about earlier is a lot of business owners don't think they have the time for training or not. And when we talk about, like, this car behind me, when we talk about slow is fast in racing, slow is fast in business. Taking the 15 minutes once a week to just train with your employees and roll out that SOP and make sure that they're following it will save you so much more time. Because one phone call to a technician to me might be an hour, because by the time they get a hold of me or they've talked to another tech and got bad information, 15 minutes. These owners who are too scared to just not send their guys on the road right away, it's okay to take 15 minutes and just go a little slower.
That's exactly right. And also, hey, there's consultants. We have people on our staff that can write these SOPs. I actually have a lot of templates that I'm glad to share with people and help them get through the process. I've even wrote a book about it. It's called Standardizing Standard Operating Procedures, and I'm going to put a link in here to get a free copy of that in an ebook shortly, or if you want the hard copy, you can get it off Amazon. Just search my name and you'll be able to find that book. So Cheryl, what about the rollout? Do you think it's important to have the rollout?
I think you do. I mean, you're introducing something that some people have never seen. You need to actually, this is, as he said, slow is fast. You've got to take that time to let them know how to read it. Not word for word, but just this is the way it works. Most of it's done digitally now, so it's just a matter of doing a search and finding it. But yes, I think you need to take the time to do that, because if you don't, they're no good sitting on the shelf.
And what's the other rule of thumb? If it's just like your children, right? Your children do what they see. So I mean, as business owners, we feel like we have a lot of children. So if you're not leading by example by taking time to even go through the SOP, what technician is going to take the time? When they pull off to the side of the road and they're 15 minutes ahead of a service call, they're looking at their own phone, right? They're not maybe going into that SOP document on the digital side because no one's even showed them where it is or what it is or why. So I know that a couple of friends of mine in business, they have like a system that tracks how often people have gone into classes or 5 or 10 minute videos. And then there's like a point system, and it's tracked and marketed on the wall at the office. I think that incentive works really well too. Keeps people interactive in their SOPs or other information that's necessary to put downstream.
Okay, so at this point, we're just going to imagine that you have done the work. You have compiled this significant library that's taken everything out of your head, this massive amount of information, and you have put it down in a readable format. It has been edited out. The wording is good. The grammar is right. All this stuff has been done. Now you got to put it into action. And there's a couple key thoughts. And here is what they are. And a lot of this I want to credit my buddy Al Levy with for sharing some of his process, because that's where I learned this part right here was from Al, who is an expert in this area also. So here's the first thing. You can't just hand them the book and say, hey, here it is, read it. It ain't going to happen. They're going to sit there and collect dust. So the first thing you got to do is you have to read the SOP out loud to your people, not you, but one of your people on your team has got to read this SOP out loud. Then you're going to be, and you can't do 10 in a day. It ain't going to happen. You got to really make it slow. We're going to roll out the highest priority in front of our people. Someone in the room is going to read this out. Then you as the leader, you're going to ask the following question. Okay, Joe, do you understand this and agree to comply? And you're going to go around the room and ask every person that question. And then this SOP that everybody has agreed to, they're going to sign off, because at the bottom it's going to say, I agree to understand this SOP and I agree to comply with this. And they sign off on it. That then goes into your files. Okay. This is the start of the rollout. There's a little more coming out here. But Randy, how's that sounding to you so far?
It makes complete sense, because the time frame that people can pay attention is very limited. So working on one sheet, one topic, and having other people invested in reading it out loud and answering those questions is the way to go.
That's correct. Now, at this point, it becomes the law of the land. This is the company operating process. Cheryl, what's your thoughts about it to this point?
I think that's a good way to do it, because it's been presented. They're with their peers. This is the time for them to ask the questions, or either if there's something they don't understand, or if there's something wrong that doesn't work because they've worked in that particular area. Now's the time to do it. Get it tweaked one time. Of course, I mean, it's good until the next problem comes up, but that's where we've all got to realize that SOPs change. And this is my question back to you. Okay, procedures change on SOP number 12. Do you do a complete new rollout on that? Or do you at that point just send out memos to the people?
You do a new rollout with that SOP, rereading it, emphasizing the change, and you're numbering your SOPs. Okay, you got to come up with a numbering system. So you got to come back and re-roll that one out where everybody understands the change. And you go through, and it may sound time consuming, but you got to remember, you're cutting waste, you're increasing profits. So is the time invested a good investment? You better believe it. Barbara asked a while ago, when you say rollout, what do you mean? Every SOP at once or piecemeal? And she just put in there, okay, got it. So Barbara, I'm glad that you're able to understand that and pass that along to, upper management here. And hopefully we can get them to watch this. Okay, now you've rolled it out. Go ahead, Randy.
Well, I got a question. I got one real quick question. Just because I know what you're saying, and it still can be a little confusing, I think, for some of the listeners. Rolling out the entire SOP when you make one change, I think you mean rolling out the entire section that's changed. Because like our stuff is binders and binders. So if we change something about the ladder safety, then we go over the entire ladder safety protocol, not the entire 14 books.
No, not all of them, just that one. Highlight.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that
highlighting that change. So now we've got the SOPs. We're now approving them one by one. And this is the next thing that I have learned. You now have to have a place for storage and access. And in fact, you got to have two. And I've learned this through experience. Number one, you need a digital location that can be reached via the cloud, such as a Josh Kelly wiki page. It can be other ways, but it can be accessed in a digital form. But you also have to provide it in a written form. And here's why. Some people can deal very well with digital information. Some people have got to see it printed. And if you look at an example, if you take a book, Cheryl is a person that would order an ebook. For me, I want the printed book. I want the book in my hand. So
I
what
want to
you
write
got,
in it. I
right?
want to write in it. Yeah.
There you go. So you got to put this in both forms. And then you got to put it in each of your service vehicles, the printed form, and also in the office. And by having this, you've got it where it's accessible. And it's accessible at all times through whichever method. Now, this means you have to continuously update this written form. I'm going to pick up something here. Randy, what you're looking at right now, okay, this is my SOP book from back in the 1990s when I first wrote SOPs. And we had these books. There was no digital storage in those days. So every truck and the office had a copy of this, and every page, this may sound ridiculous, every page is in plastic or cellophane wrappers.
That's
So
how I
when
started. That's how we started.
Yeah. So when we change an SOP, you bring the book in, and somebody in the office actually pulls the old one out and puts the new one in. Now, this may sound like a really complicated process, but the whole idea here is simplification, stopping waste, stopping the repetition of the stupid mistakes that people make. And it's all part of delivering a profitable company. What do you think, Randy?
I agree, and I think was very fortunate because I didn't have the coaching mentors early in my business, and I didn't have this resource. But one of the things I did do is go after lots of training and certifications, and somehow, not knowing the value that I was receiving in those certifications, we would get the binders. So if we got certified for carpet cleaning, we got a binder, which is technically became an SOP for us on what to use, what temperature should the water be, and all the right steps. And I was like, this is gold. So like every certification, I would get a binder, and then I'd take it back and make copies because I wanted to not only train my team, but have one in every truck. Like if they had a question on a discoloration, they didn't have to call me. They could just go to the binder and look, discoloration, product, pH. So I really like that. We didn't have a lot of updates along the way, so we didn't have to change out the sheets, but they all definitely came with those the cellophane sheet covers.
They did. Cheryl, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, definitely you have to have it both ways. And just to clarify, it's not that I like the ebook, it's that when I don't have time to read, Alexa can read it to me. So that's why I like the ebook. But other than that, no, the thing about it is people, I think a lot of times they're afraid to ask questions also. So they go ahead and do it wrong. And I think that with the SOPs where they could look at it, if they were afraid to come to the owner and ask a question, at least they can go find it. That to me is one of the most important parts because a lot of people just are afraid of the question.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because we open line communication. I mean, we definitely stress that. Just call us before you do anything in case you have a question until it becomes like, if you have the wrong technician and they call you, hey, can I start my truck? Like, no, that's not the right time to call. But when it comes to a real concern, we've trained our people to just be very comfortable talking to another technician, working their way up the chain of command.
That's it. So what you've got to do is develop the priorities. What is the most urgent need in your company? Like I said, this is what I'm going to promise you. You will never, ever be complete in your SOPs because new problems are going to arise. Believe me, somebody's going to dream up something you have not anticipated. And this is how you're going to react. But then the next step is accountability. Accountability. You have to hold your people accountable to the processes and the procedures that you've established. Remember, they have agreed to comply with them. So you've got to have the process of accountability. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a minute. But Randy, do you agree that accountability is one of the important factors in making this system work?
Yes, and that's where the incentive program, unfortunately, it's hard to relay information to your technicians who may be single operators in a service truck, and then expect them to have time, make time for this extra training or reviewing of these documents. And a lot of the SOPs aren't really like no drinking on the job. We get that. They don't have to look that one up again, right? But it has to maybe do with service steps, you know, invoicing steps, something they may have just been like off a little bit and they want to review it. And then most of the time, the incentives apply to the safety protocols, because we want them fresh in their mind, right? And ours are seasonality, just like the chimney industry. So when it comes time to winter, we have our own set of rules that we address and remind everybody of. Safe driving, all kinds of stuff, right?
That's
so
correct.
I think is right. Like in incentive based, meaning like they get some sort of point system for reviewing these videos during that time period is really important.
Yep. Cheryl, your thoughts at this point?
I agree with Randy. I mean, it's the time frame for them, their family life as they use it. But we have to, the main thing is, as employers, we have to see where the vulnerability of these people are at and what they're willing to do and what they're willing to work at. Basically, I'm not going to say on their own time, but on their own without the questions. So I see nothing wrong. I have yet to see anything wrong with a SOP. It's just something that needs to be in place. And it actually, the majority needs to be in place before the business owns, if it's or opens, if that's possible. And most of us got started way too late. But for a new business, I would say put this at the top of your list.
Yeah, it is. And when you look at it, let's take some real world examples. Let's take McDonald's, the #1 small business in the world. Every McDonald's is a small business, and they have systems that they operate to. So no matter which McDonald's you go into, you're still going to get the same crappy hamburger. Okay.
Horrible.
It is, but it's the way it is. And if you go into a Subway restaurant, which recently was sold for a considerable sum of money, what did you see? You see that Subway sandwich is put together the same way. And that Subway restaurant, they all look the same because they found a system that works and they've replicated it. And that's the secret of your business. How can you make your business operate? McDonald's operates on high school kids, okay? They've got this system set up, and that's what you got to do. But now it breaks down to that accountability part, okay? And what you've got to do is track and measure what's happening in your business. We call it waste tracking. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. But as you do this waste tracking, you're asking yourself this question. Was it because the SOP is not there? If we do, we got to write an SOP. Number 2, if the SOP is wrong, we got to modify it and correct it. But number 3, someone didn't follow the SOP. So what happens in my system of SOPs, when somebody violates your SOP, you've got to write a disciplinary SOP. And to do this, you take the original SOP that you wrote and you pull it up on your computer, and then in red ink, you highlight the parts of the SOP that was missed, okay? Then at the bottom, you create a signature line. You share this with the employee who has violated, not followed the SOP. And at the bottom, it says, I understand what areas of the SOP I have not complied with, and I will comply in this in the future. What you've just put together is good for your documentation if termination becomes a requirement. And Randy, I know documentation is a big word for you, just like it is for me, right?
We use it a lot. We use it a lot in, I would call it in the offense of our business, because again, in our waterproofing business, I'll give this example 100 times. We do around the perimeter in the basement, we jackhammer, remove concrete, lay our pipes, stuff that we have to do concrete over, right? Real abbreviated. A couple weeks go by, homeowner calls and says, when you did that, you did a great job, but you cracked my entire basement floor. Documentation. Initial walkthrough video shows those cracks were there before we stepped foot, right? So that's where documentation on the offense is a very protective measure for your business. Also, if you've documented that you have read the SOP and then they don't follow those steps, you can say, you signed this, that you read this, you didn't do those steps. Now you have to sign this saying, I'm not going to do it again, right? So it can't be, you're not on the defense there. You're always on the offense.
That's correct. And that's vastly important in the world of human resources because it's so easy to have this go awry where termination becomes an important thing. And somebody says, hey, they terminated me due to my sexual orientation. Well, you can't do that. They terminated because of my sex, because of my age, because of all these things. But if you have this documented systems put down, guess what? You're going to be able to defend your actions. So, Cheryl, what's your thoughts on my system of accountability?
I think it's great. I mean, everybody needs to be held accountable as officers as well as the other people. But I want to inject one thing here and see your thoughts on it, and because it arises every now and then. A lot of people are assuming that their handbook is enough to cover the SOP. So, with the Facebook and things like that. My opinion is they still need an SOP covering these areas, but I have a lot of people that don't understand that.
Yeah.
I guess I don't understand how they can think that way, because maybe if I we offer 4 primary services. Each one of those services has a book because there's steps to service, right? But the first book is, whether it's first in order, but like the first book before the 4 services is how to address your vehicle, stock your vehicle, how to meet and greet the residential or commercial customer. Then the next book is a subset. Are you on this service call? These are the steps you take. This is your checkout of that service call. So it's crazy to me they think a general handbook written by a payroll company is even close. It's not enough.
I agree. It's just it's something that arises every now and then. So.
Yeah, no, I think way more. I bet way more often than we would think, Cheryl. Probably they're afraid to ask you or bring it up because as you're talking, they're like, okay, that's not it,
So here's the whole thing. SOPs are a recognized process to eradicate chaos in your business, to give you freedom as a manager, to release those handcuffs where you've got to have a phone to answer questions all day long. Here's when you know you have the system complete. Whenever someone asks you a question and your answer is, well, Joe, what's your SOP say about that? And whenever you can start answering that, every time there's a question, you know what? You now have attained the freedom that you started this business to have. Because I don't think anybody started a business to go through chaos and turmoil and the heart-wrenching mental strain of managing business as it often turns to. So, Randy, what's your closing thoughts for today on our subject?
I'm so glad you brought up the thing about freedom, because I forgot that was probably a large part of our topic today is why are we developing these things? To be efficient in our business, to be profitable, all of those, predictable profit statements. But freedom is really great after the financial freedom. The time freedom is the way to go. And one of the things I've set a goal for ourselves is at some point I don't have to carry a phone. We just want to be able to know that everybody knows what they're doing in order to support the team in the business. And a lot of times I will look back and be like, wow, nobody called me for at least 4 working days in a row. That's pretty good because we have a lot of irons in the fire. So when I can go 4 days in a row without a phone call, that's like an achievement for us.
Got you. Cheryl, what about you? Got any closing thoughts on today's topic?
My main thought would be is to take time to do it. It's definitely worth it when it's done. And it's not as time consuming as most people would agree. Let's put it this way. It's a whole lot different from the time you're going to spend if you don't do it.
Yeah. And I'm going to go to words of one of Cheryl's people that she is certified by, and that is the immortal Zig Ziglar. And a quote that Zig Ziglar said was, you don't have to be great to start, but you got to start if you're going to be great. And this is what I can promise you, and I've seen this happen. The most difficult SOP you will ever write will be your first one. After you write the first one, they're going to start rolling. You're going to get the system together. I've watched this happen where people have struggled to write that first one. And then they start going, and then they start coming out, and they're producing them one behind the other. I can tell you this, the first meeting you have your rollout, it's going to be the most difficult one. You're going to get your stride. You're going to understand how this works, and it's going to start working for you. I can tell you that the first time you write a disciplinary SOP, it's going to be the toughest one, but then it's going to come together. So what you got to do, just like in anything else, if you're sitting there and you're complaining about the road you have paved, if you're complaining about the rough travel you have every day in your business, I want you to remember something. You poured the asphalt in
It's
your
your
business.
asphalt.
It's your asphalt. Okay. Maybe that can come out different ways, but
Yeah.
you got to make that decision to move on this. If you want to regain your life, if you want to have the freedom which you wanted to in your business, unless you just truly enjoy being a workaholic and never want that freedom, hey, keep struggling, keep pulling your hair out. But if you want that freedom, this is how you can do it. So I want to we appreciate you joining us today. And if you've got some information, hey, that's fantastic. And if we can help you out, if you need help in developing your SOPs, we have the people. We can take you through the writing. We can take you all the way through the implementation, through the rollout. Is it going to be easy? No, but here's what I can promise you. It will give you that freedom. It will make things go better. So with that, we'll see you next week and hopefully next week. Hey, we understand there is a rumor, Cheryl, that Brandy may be back next week. Okay. And we may get Josh back. Nobody can hear you.
It's just a rumor.
It's just a rumor, but we've been missing Brandy for a couple weeks now. So hopefully the rumor is that Brandy will be back on our broadcast next week. So appreciate you joining us. We'll see you next week on the next episode of the CVC Home